The morning Marcia Shackleford slapped a bright orange violation notice on my front door at 7 in the morning, during a full-on blizzard, was the morning I decided I was done playing nice. I mean, I was already annoyed. I had been up since 5 because the wind was howling like something out of a disaster movie. The temperature had dropped to 9 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, and my heating oil gauge was sitting dangerously close to the red zone. I had scheduled the delivery weeks in advance precisely because I knew this storm was coming. Sunrise Fuel and Heating had been filling my tank every winter for 6 years without a single problem. Their driver, a big cheerful guy named Dale, knew my driveway, knew the fill pipe location on the side of the house, and could get in and out in under 10 minutes. I had zero worries about the delivery. Then I looked at the orange paper flapping against my storm door and my stomach dropped. It was a formal HOA violation notice. Not just a friendly reminder, not a conversational note. A full printed form with highlighted boxes and a reference number at the top, the kind of document that communicated bureaucratic seriousness without actually containing any common sense. The violation cited was unauthorized commercial vehicles in residential driveways and cul-de-sacs, Ref. HOA Code Section 7, Subsection C, Paragraph 4. Below that, in Marcia Shackleford's distinctly aggressive handwriting, was a personal annotation that read, "Heating oil trucks are large, loud, unsightly, and damaging to community curb appeal. Effective immediately, no delivery trucks of this classification will be permitted in Pinecrest Hollow during designated quiet hours, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. I stood there in my bathrobe, barefoot on cold tile, holding this piece of paper in disbelief. My heating oil delivery was scheduled for 8 in the morning. That was right in the middle of her newly invented quiet hours. Hours that, as far as I knew, had never been voted on, never been ratified, never been published in any official HOA newsletter, and had apparently been invented by Marcia Shackleford sometime between last Tuesday and this morning. I pulled my phone off the charger and called Dale. He answered on the second ring. "Hey Brian, on my way, should be there in about 30 minutes. Roads are rough, but I'm coming from the depot." "Hold on, Dale," I said, rubbing my eyes. "We might have a problem." I read him the notice. There was a long pause on his end, followed by what I can only describe as an exhausted sigh, the kind of sound a man makes when he has heard this exact category of nonsense one too many times. "Brian, I am a licensed heating fuel delivery driver," Dale said. "I am operating a DOT-certified vehicle. I am delivering a legally purchased product to a private residence in a weather emergency. There is nothing in any municipal code or state law that gives an HOA the authority to block an emergency heating delivery." "I know that," I said, "but this woman is going to be standing in my driveway in the snow." "Will she, though?" Dale said. I looked out the window. Snowflakes were coming down in thick curtains. The street looked like the inside of a snow globe. My thermometer on the back porch read 7 degrees. "Yeah," I said, "she absolutely will." And she was. When Dale's big green and white Sunrise Fuel truck came rumbling down Pinecrest Hollow Drive at 8:15, Marcia Shackleford was standing at the foot of my driveway in a puffy purple coat, a wool hat pulled down over her ears, holding a clipboard and wearing an expression that could have curdled milk at 40 paces. Standing next to her was Gary Fenimore, the HOA treasurer, who always went along with whatever Marcia said because he was terrified of her, and some woman I half recognized from the pool committee whose name I could never remember. Dale pulled the truck to a stop and rolled his window down. "Good morning," he said pleasantly. "I have a scheduled heating oil delivery for this address." "This vehicle is not permitted in this cul-de-sac during restricted hours," Marcia announced, raising her clipboard like a judge raising a gavel. "Ma'am, I'm delivering heating fuel to a residence. It's 7 degrees outside. The temperature is irrelevant to HOA regulations." Dale looked at me. I was standing in my driveway in my coat and boots now, arms crossed, watching. "Brian," Marcia said, pivoting to me with her clipboard arm swinging around like a crane. "You received your notice this morning. You are in violation. If this truck completes this delivery, you will be fined $250 per infraction per day until you appear before the HOA board." "Marcia," I said calmly, "when exactly was Section 7, subsection C, paragraph 4 voted on by the full board?" She blinked. "The board has the authority to enforce and interpret existing codes." "That's not what I asked. I asked when it was voted on. Because I have every meeting agenda and every set of minutes from the last 4 years, and I don't recall this ever being on the agenda." The pool committee woman shifted her weight from foot to foot in the snow. "The board voted on it privately," Marcia said, recovering quickly. "An emergency session." "Great," I said. "I'll need the minutes from that meeting. Written record, board member signatures, the whole thing. I'll expect that in my mailbox by 5 o'clock today." "You don't get to make demands of the board, Brian." "Actually, under our HOA's own governing documents, I absolutely do. Article 12, Section 3 of the Pinecrest Hollow CC and RS requires written minutes be made available to any homeowner upon request within 5 business days. I'm requesting them right now." Marcia's jaw tightened. Gary Fenimore was staring at his boots. "This conversation is over," Marcia said. "Driver, you need to leave the property." "Ma'am," Dale said from the truck window, still perfectly calm, "I am on private property at the invitation of the homeowner. You are standing in his driveway. I'd actually like to ask you to step aside. I will not be spoken to that way by a delivery driver. You're being spoken to politely, ma'am. The temperature is 7 degrees. This man needs heat in his home. I'm going to complete this delivery. If you do, I will have your truck towed." Dale reached into his cab and pulled out his phone. "Go ahead and call that tow truck. I'll call the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's office because blocking an emergency fuel delivery in sub-zero temperatures could constitute reckless endangerment under state statute. Your call." I could have kissed Dale at that moment. Truly. Marcia stood there for a full 10 seconds. The wind blew. Snow swirled around her purple coat. Gary Fenimore looked like he wanted to evaporate. Then Marcia stepped aside, said something sharp under her breath, and walked stiff-legged back toward the street. Gary followed her immediately like a shadow. The pool committee woman gave me an apologetic look before hurrying after them. Dale completed the delivery without further incident. 420 gallons, full tank. He handed me the receipt, shook my hand, and drove away. I watched his truck disappear around the corner, and I stood there in the cold for a minute, feeling my blood pressure slowly return to something like normal. But I knew this wasn't over. With Marcia Shackleford, it was never over after the first skirmish. She was the type to let things sit for a week and then come at you from a completely different angle when you thought the storm had passed. Sure enough, 3 days later, I found a formal notice of violation hearing in my mailbox. The fine had already been issued. $250 for the first day, another $250 for the second and third days, totaling $750 that I allegedly owed the HOA for allowing an unauthorized commercial vehicle to complete a prohibited delivery during restricted hours. There was also a note informing me that failure to appear at the hearing or pay the fine could result in a lien being placed on my property. A lien. On my property. Because I heated my house. I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and pulled out the Pinecrest Hollow HOA governing documents, which I had actually downloaded and saved as a PDF a year and a half earlier when Marcia had tried to fine my neighbor Dave Kowalski for having a wind chime she deemed acoustically disruptive to the community standard. I had helped Dave fight that one too, and we had won, which I think was the moment Marcia had decided I was her primary nemesis in this neighborhood. I read through Section 7 of the CC and RS very carefully. It was about commercial vehicles, yes. It talked about prohibiting residents from parking commercial vehicles they personally owned in their driveways for extended periods. It said nothing, absolutely nothing, about delivery vehicles servicing a residence. It did not define delivery windows or quiet hours anywhere in the document. The restricted hours Marcia had cited were completely fabricated. I also pulled up the state statutes on HOA authority and heating fuel delivery, and Dale had been right. There was absolutely no provision in law that allowed an HOA to block an emergency utility delivery to a private home, particularly in conditions that posed a genuine health risk to the occupant. In fact, interfering with or attempting to deny utility service to a home in winter conditions could create serious civil and potentially criminal liability depending on the circumstances. I called my neighbor Dave Kowalski next. Dave is a retired electrician with a lot of time on his hands and a very long memory for grudges, and he had been watching the situation unfold with great interest. "Tell me everything," Dave said when he picked up. I told him everything. "She's shaking you down," Dave said flatly. "She's done this to 3 other people in the last 2 years. The Hendersons paid one of her phony fines just to make it stop, and Mrs. Patterson settled hers by agreeing to remove her garden gnomes. This is what she does. She invents violations, fines people, and collects money that probably isn't going into the HOA account the way it should." "Wait," I said. "Say that again." "I said the money probably isn't going where it should." "How confident are you in that?" Dave paused. "Confident enough that I've been keeping a spreadsheet for 2 years." "Dave, why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was waiting for the right moment." I think this might be it. Dave came over that afternoon with his laptop and his spreadsheet. He had cross-referenced the HOA's published budget reports, which were posted annually on the community website, against the fines that he had personally confirmed were collected from neighbors. He had talked to 6 different homeowners. Between fines collected and dues collected, there was a gap of somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000 over 2 years that was unaccounted for in the published financials. It wasn't ironclad evidence, but it was a very interesting pattern. "We need someone to look at the actual bank records," I said. "Under the CC&RS," Dave said, "homeowners can request a financial audit." "Let me guess, Article 12, Dave grinned. "Article 12, Section 5. I drafted the audit request that evening, typed it up on formal letterhead, and had Dave and 4 other neighbors sign it. I sent it to the HOA board by certified mail the next morning. According to Section 5, the board had 30 days to respond. The audit request covered the full 2 years Dave's spreadsheet covered, plus the current year. Now, while all of that was ticking in the background, I had to deal with the violation hearing, which was set for the following Tuesday evening at the clubhouse. Let me tell you about the Pinecrest Hollow Clubhouse. It's a decent-sized building at the center of the community, with a main meeting room, a small kitchen, a recreation room with pool tables and a big TV, and a storage area. The HOA uses it for board meetings, community events, the annual holiday party, and apparently as Marcia Shackleford's personal stage for theater. The building has its own heating system, which runs on oil. Specifically, it runs on heating oil delivered by Sunrise Fuel and Heating. Sunrise Fuel and Heating, the same company that delivered my oil. The same company whose trucks Marcia Shackleford had just tried to ban from Pinecrest Hollow. I knew about the clubhouse oil delivery because I was actually on the community events committee, and I had signed off on the last 2 annual delivery contracts with Sunrise when the previous events committee chair had stepped down. The HOA had a standing annual contract with Sunrise for 3 scheduled deliveries to the clubhouse each winter season. The next delivery was scheduled for the 3rd week of January, right in the thick of winter, and it was the biggest of the 3 because it filled the clubhouse's large tank ahead of the coldest stretch of the year. The holiday party was always in late January too, which meant the clubhouse needed to be properly heated for that event. I had a conversation with Dale again after the hearing notice arrived. "Dale," I said, "who manages the Pinecrest Hollow Clubhouse account with Sunrise. Formally, The HOA board president signs the contract each year, but operationally, I think the last several renewal confirmations came from the events committee. So the events committee has the authority to modify or cancel delivery arrangements. Dale was quiet for a moment. Brian, what are you thinking? I'm thinking about the Clubhouse delivery, the one scheduled for January 19th. That's a significant delivery, about 600 gallons. If the HOA bans commercial vehicles like your truck from the neighborhood, I said slowly, doesn't that ban technically apply to every delivery, including the one to their own clubhouse? Another pause. Then Dale laughed, not a small laugh, a genuine belly-deep laugh. Brian, he said, I think you need to call our operations manager. I think I do. I called Sunrise Fuel's operations manager, a woman named Carol, whom I had dealt with during the contract renewals. I explained the situation. The HOA had issued a blanket restriction on commercial vehicles, including heating oil delivery trucks. They had threatened to have Sunrise's truck towed, and given that the HOA had made clear they intended to enforce this restriction, Sunrise might want to consider whether they could guarantee safe and uncontested access for the clubhouse delivery. Carol was quiet for a moment. Are you asking us to cancel the delivery? I'm asking you to assess whether your driver can safely complete a delivery without being physically obstructed by the HOA president, given what happened at my residence. We had a security incident report from Dale about that stop, Carol said. That is a concern for us, yes. The restriction, as I understand it, was stated as a blanket ban during the hours of 6 to 10 a.m. and 3 to 7 p.m. The clubhouse delivery is scheduled for 8 a.m. I could hear Carol typing. Brian, as a member of the events committee, do you have standing to request that we place the clubhouse delivery on hold pending clarification of access terms from the HOA? I believe I do, I said, and I'm making that request. Consider it done, Carol said. I'll flag the account. The January 19th delivery is on administrative hold until we receive written confirmation from the HOA that our vehicles will have unobstructed access to the property. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Brian. And please tell Dale to stay warm out there. The violation hearing was on Tuesday night. The clubhouse was warm and well lit, the heat running strong from the tank that still had residual oil from the fall delivery. About 30 homeowners showed up, which was more than usual. Word had gotten around. Marcia Shackleford sat at the head table in a blazer, flanked by Gary Fenimore and another board member, a quiet man named Ted Ransom, who I had always found reasonable. I came prepared. I had a printed copy of the CC and RS with relevant sections highlighted. I had a printed copy of the state statute covering HOA authority limits. I had a written statement from Dale describing the blockade attempt. I had photographs I had taken of Marcia and her companion standing in my driveway, because I had a camera on my front porch and one on the side of the house, and I had captured the entire interaction from 2 angles. When Marcia called the hearing to order and read out the charges, I stood up before she could finish. Point of order, I said. Before we proceed, I'd like the board to enter into the record the minutes from the emergency session at which Section 7, subsection C, paragraph 4 was allegedly amended to include restricted delivery hours. I submitted a formal request for these minutes 6 days ago and have not received them. Marcia smiled thinly. The board is reviewing that request. Your own governing documents require production within 5 business days. Today is day 6. Ted Ransom cleared his throat. Marcia, he's right. We should have gotten that to him. We'll have it to him by end of week, Marcia said, waving her hand. I want to be very clear, I said, keeping my voice level and pleasant, that if those minutes do not exist, then no enforceable amendment was made to Section 7. The restricted hours policy has no legal standing, and the fine issued to me is unlawful under the HOA's own governing documents. I will be challenging it in small claims court and seeking recovery of any legal costs, murmuring from the homeowners behind me. Furthermore, I continued, I want to draw the board's attention to something. Marcia, when you issued that notice and when you physically blocked Dale's truck, you stated that heating oil trucks are banned from Pinecrest Hollow during those hours. You said that was the policy, a blanket ban. That's correct, Marcia said. Great. Then you'll be aware that Sunrise Fuel and Heating has placed the Clubhouse's January 19th oil delivery on administrative hold, pending written confirmation from the HOA that their vehicles will have unobstructed access. Silence, complete and total silence in that room. Gary Fenimore's head came up from his notepad slowly like a turtle emerging from a shell. They what? Marcia said quietly. The Clubhouse delivery, I said. About 600 gallons. It was scheduled for January 19th, which is 3 weeks from now. Sunrise flagged it after the incident at my residence. They need written confirmation that their vehicles will be permitted to enter the community during the scheduled delivery window, which falls within your stated restricted hours, before they'll proceed. That is completely different, Marcia said, her voice rising. The Clubhouse is a community facility. That delivery is essential. It's the exact same truck, I said. The exact same company. The exact same category of vehicle that you told me was banned. If your policy is real and applies to everyone equally, it applies to the Clubhouse delivery too. If it doesn't apply to the Clubhouse delivery, then your policy is selectively enforced, which is a violation of the CC and RS equity provisions in Article 8, Section 1. I set my printed copy of Article 8 on the table and slid it toward Ted Ransom, who picked it up and read it. She's right, Ted said, and then immediately corrected himself. I mean, he's right. The holiday party, someone behind me said. That's the third Saturday in January. The Clubhouse will freeze without that delivery. Marcia, Gary said, and his voice had something new in it. Something that sounded like someone who had been sitting quietly in a corner for a very long time finally deciding to speak. We can't have the Clubhouse go without heat. It'll damage the pipes. We can get oil from somewhere else, Marcia said. On 3 weeks' notice in the middle of winter, said Dave Kowalski from his seat near the back. Every heating oil company in a 50-mile radius is slammed right now. You know what the wait time is for a new customer hookup in January? 6 to 8 weeks, and they charge emergency rates on top of that. More murmuring, louder this time. This is what you caused, said a woman named Linda Chen, who had been at the last 3 meetings and always asked sharp, precise questions. You blocked Brian's delivery, you made up a policy, and now the whole community's Clubhouse doesn't have a guaranteed heat source for January. The policy stands, Marcia said. We will resolve the Clubhouse situation internally. How? Ted asked. Marcia, I'm asking you directly. How do we resolve this? Marcia didn't have an answer. There's one very simple resolution, I said. Drop the fines against me. Acknowledge that the restriction on delivery vehicles was improperly enacted and has no standing. Issue a written confirmation to Sunrise that their vehicles have unobstructed access to all properties in Pinecrest Hollow, including the Clubhouse, and Sunrise will reinstate the January 19th delivery. The room was very quiet. That is extortion, Marcia said. It's called a negotiation, I said pleasantly, and the terms are pretty reasonable, all things considered. I want to vote on it, Ted said. Board vote, right now. Marcia started to object, but Ted was already going through the motion. He voted yes. Gary, to almost everyone's visible surprise, including his own, voted yes. Marcia voted no. The motion passed 2-1. The fine was dropped. The motion directed Marcia, as board president, to send written confirmation to Sunrise Fuel the next morning. She looked like she was chewing on something very sour, but she was outvoted and she knew it. I thought that would be the end of it. But you have to understand something about Marcia Shackleford. She does not lose gracefully. She does not accept outcomes she doesn't like and move on. She broods. She strategizes. And about a week after the hearing, Dave came over with his laptop again, and this time his expression was different, more serious. I've been doing some more digging, he said, setting the laptop on my kitchen table. I reached out to the Hendersons like I said. Nancy Henderson had a copy of the fine notice she paid, $200 paid by check to the HOA general account. Except when I look at the HOA's published financials for that quarter, the income column shows no fine receipts for that period. Not a dollar. I leaned forward. Where did the money go? The check cleared, Brian. Nancy showed me her bank statement. It cleared, but it's not in the HOA records. I looked at the spreadsheet. Then I looked at Dave. Then I looked at the spreadsheet again. Dave, I said, this isn't just mismanagement. If she's collecting fines and those fines are clearing but not appearing in the HOA's books, that's theft. Dave nodded. That's what I think too. We need to take this to someone beyond the HOA. I know. We spent the next 2 evenings going through everything Dave had compiled. He had statements from 6 homeowners who had paid fines. He had the cleared check images that Nancy Henderson and 2 other neighbors had pulled from their bank records. He had the HOA's published financials for the corresponding periods. In every case where a fine had been paid, there was a check that cleared through a bank account. But in 4 out of 6 cases, that income did not appear in the published HOA financials. We also made a discovery when we dug into the HOA bank account documentation that Ted Ransom, who was now fully on our side, quietly pulled for us. The HOA had 2 accounts. One was the general operating account that appeared in the published financials. The other was an older account that had been set up years before Marcia joined the board, but which Marcia had retained signature authority over. It was described in the account documents as a reserve contingency account. But the transactions in that account did not reflect anything that appeared in the HOA's published reserve fund documentation. And there were deposits in that account that corresponded in amount and in timing with several of the fine payments Dave had documented. Ted Ransom looked at this quietly for a long time. Then he said, "I'm calling a lawyer." "I think you should call the police," I said. Ted called both. The HOA's attorney looked at what we had and told Ted that the evidence, while preliminary, was consistent with misappropriation of HOA funds. He also said that, because the amounts involved crossed a threshold that made it a potential felony under state law, we were legally and ethically obligated to report it to law enforcement. The attorney actually offered to accompany Ted to the police station. I want to be clear about something here. Dave and I didn't go to the police out of spite. We weren't trying to destroy Marcia's life. We were reporting what appeared to be a genuine financial crime against the homeowners of Pinecrest Hollow. Every single person who had paid a fine thinking it was going to maintain the community's shared facilities, and instead had their money disappear into a secondary account, was a victim. This wasn't about a heating oil truck anymore. It hadn't been for a while. The police investigation took about 3 weeks. During that time, things in the neighborhood were tense, but also oddly calm. Marcia was still nominally the board president, but she had gone quiet in a way that was very uncharacteristic of her. She wasn't at the informal neighborhood gatherings. She wasn't posting on the community Facebook group. Gary Fenimore told Ted that she had called him twice to ask what people were saying, and both times he had told her honestly that people were very unhappy. The holiday party happened as scheduled in late January. The sunrise delivery came through on January 19th without a hitch. Dale pulled the big green and white truck right into the clubhouse lot, connected the hose, and filled the tank in about 20 minutes. I was there when it happened, not because I needed to be, but because I wanted to see it. The clubhouse was warm and bright for the party. About 80 people showed up. There was a moment during the evening when I was standing near the fireplace with a cup of cider and Dave walked over, and we just sort of looked at the room full of neighbors laughing and talking, and neither of us said anything, but we both understood what we were looking at. The investigation concluded in early February. The detective who had been handling it called Ted Ransom first, then asked that Ted make Brian Walsh available for a follow-up interview, since I had been the one who initially identified the discrepancy and helped compile the documentation. The findings were significant. The secondary account had received 17 deposits over 2 years, totaling $11,400. Of that amount, at least $9,600 was traceable to fine payments made by homeowners that had never been recorded in the HOA's official accounts. The remaining roughly $1,800 was from an HOA reimbursement check for a maintenance project that Marcia had redirected into the secondary account. The account was in Marcia Shackleford's name and had only one authorized signatory. Her. Marcia was charged with theft by deception, embezzlement from a community organization, and breach of fiduciary duty. The charges were serious enough that she was arraigned, and while she was not held in jail, she was released on bail with conditions that included surrendering her position as HOA board president immediately. Her attorney put out a statement saying she would contest the charges. Her first court appearance was set for late March. She resigned from the board the day after her arraignment. She sent a formal letter, very brief, very cold, that said she was stepping down due to personal circumstances requiring her full attention. No apology, no acknowledgement of anything. That was very Marcia. The afternoon her resignation letter arrived, Ted Ransom called an emergency board meeting. He was elevated to acting board president. He asked me and Dave if we would be willing to serve on a temporary financial oversight committee to help audit the HOA accounts properly and establish new controls. We said yes. Linda Chen, who turned out to have a background in accounting, agreed to chair it. She was incredibly thorough. Within 2 weeks, she had produced a complete audit report. The audit confirmed everything Dave's spreadsheet had suggested and more. The HOA had been financially mismanaged for 2 years in ways that went beyond the embezzlement. Several maintenance contracts had been awarded to a vendor with no competitive bidding process, which was required under the CC and RS for any contract over a certain dollar amount. The vendor in question had produced work that was well below standard. Linda identified about $4,000 in overcharges. Some of this may have been incompetence rather than fraud, but either way it had cost the homeowners money. The audit report went to all homeowners. There was a community meeting in late February, with fresh snow on the ground outside and a wind chill that made the parking lot feel like the surface of the moon. 70% of Pinecrest Hollow's homeowners showed up. That was an almost unheard-of turnout. People came because they were angry, yes, but also because they wanted to understand what had happened and what came next. Ted walked everyone through the audit findings. Linda presented the financial recommendations. I presented the legal summary of the governing document violations. Dave presented the timeline of events from the initial fine against me all the way through the investigation. There were a lot of questions. Some people were furious. A few were sad, because some of them had genuinely liked Marcia before all of this, or had at least found her useful when her aggression was pointed at someone else's problems. Mrs. Patterson, who had removed her garden gnomes to settle one of Marcia's trumped-up fines, looked like she was doing math in her head. "Can we get our fines back?" she asked. "That's part of the civil recovery process," Linda said. "The HOA's attorney is working on it. We expect to recover most of what was misappropriated from the secondary account. It won't be fast, but yes, the intent is to make the affected homeowners whole." "What about the gnomes?" Dave muttered next to me. I elbowed him. The community voted to hold fresh elections for all 3 board positions. The election was held in March via mail-in ballot, with a neutral third party supervising the count for the first time in Pinecrest Hollow's history. That was one of Linda's recommendations, and it passed by a wide margin. Ted Ransom ran for the president position and won easily. Linda Chen ran for treasurer and won. A quiet retired schoolteacher named Harvey Bloom, who had been nominated by about 8 different neighbors independently, ran for the 3rd seat and won. The new board's first order of business was to formally rescind the unauthorized delivery restriction that Marcia had enacted. They posted the rescission notice on the community website, sent it by email to all homeowners, and mailed a physical copy to every household. It was one page, clearly written, and it explicitly stated that all licensed delivery vehicles, including heating fuel vehicles, had full access to all Pinecrest Hollow properties at all hours, subject only to lawful traffic and safety regulations. The second order of business was to formally thank Sunrise Fuel and Heating for their patience and professionalism throughout the situation. Ted drafted a letter and the whole new board signed it. He sent a copy to Carol, the operations manager, and a copy to Dale personally. Dale apparently put his copy on the break room bulletin board at the depot, which I found genuinely touching when he told me about it later. The third order of business was to establish a comprehensive update to the CC and RS, the first meaningful revision in over a decade. The revision process was open to all homeowners. There were 3 community workshops in March, one of which was held on an absolutely brutal frozen night when the windshield on my truck had a solid 1/4 inch of ice on it. And still, 40 people showed up with their comments and suggestions. The revised CC and RS were cleaner, more specific, more protective of homeowner rights, and contained new provisions around board transparency, competitive bidding, financial reporting, and enforcement procedures that made the kind of unilateral nonsense Marcia had pulled much harder to pull off in the future. Marcia's legal case moved through the system over the following months. Her attorney negotiated. The DA had solid evidence. In June, Marcia entered a guilty plea to 1 count of theft from a community organization and 1 count of breach of fiduciary duty. As part of her plea agreement, she was ordered to pay full restitution of $11,400 to the Pinecrest Hollow HOA, plus interest. She received a 2-year suspended sentence, meaning no prison time as long as she completed her probation requirements and stayed out of trouble. She was permanently barred from serving in any fiduciary or governance role for any homeowner association or community organization in the state. She also moved. Not immediately, but by the following fall, there was a for sale sign in front of her house. I don't know where she went. I didn't ask. I hope she found somewhere she could be happy. I genuinely mean that. What she did was wrong and she was held accountable for it, and that's where my interest in the matter ended. By the time the first snow of the following winter came down, Pinecrest Hollow felt like a completely different neighborhood. Not different in some dramatic movie way, just quieter and easier in the way that any place gets when the source of chronic low-grade tension is finally gone. People talked to each other more openly in the driveway and at the mailbox. The community Facebook group went from being a place where everyone was careful about what they said to a place where people posted pictures of their kids sledding and asked for restaurant recommendations without worrying about someone using it against them. Dave and I developed a genuine friendship out of all of it. We have coffee on Saturday mornings when the weather is bad enough to make staying inside feel like the smart option, which in our winters is about 4 months out of the year. He keeps his spreadsheet skills sharp by volunteering to help Linda with the HOA quarterly reports, which are now posted publicly on the community website every single quarter without fail. Dale brought his truck through the neighborhood the following October for the first pre-winter delivery of the season and stopped in my driveway to say hello before heading to the fill pipe. He looked happy, unremarkable in the best possible way, the kind of moment that should have been unremarkable but wasn't quite yet because of what it used to feel like. "Nobody blocking the driveway this year," he said with a grin. "Nobody blocking the driveway this year," I confirmed. He nodded, satisfied, and went about his work. I watched from the kitchen window as the hose connected and the pump ran and the gauge climbed. 400 gallons into a full tank, heat for the winter, no drama. The snow had already started sticking to the grass, thin and bright, the first real coat of winter settling over Pinecrest Hollow Drive. I poured myself a cup of coffee and thought about how strange it was that all of this had started with an orange piece of paper on my storm door at 7 in the morning during a blizzard. How one person's manufactured crisis had unraveled into a real crisis that turned out to be something much more serious underneath. How the right combination of prepared homeowners, a fearless delivery driver who knew his rights, a retired electrician with a spreadsheet habit, and an accountant who moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago not knowing she would end up essentially reforming its entire financial structure, had managed to turn the whole thing around. I also thought about the fact that Marcia, for all her scheming, had never actually thought through the consequences of her own policy. When she showed up in my driveway that snowy morning to block Dale's truck, she was thinking about control and appearance, and the particular satisfaction she seemed to get from asserting authority over people who hadn't asked for it. She wasn't thinking about the fact that the same trucks she was banning kept her precious clubhouse warm. She wasn't thinking about the audit request sitting in my near future. She wasn't thinking about Dave's spreadsheet or Ted Ransom's quiet reliability or Linda Chen's forensic eye for numbers. She was thinking about winning a small battle, and she lost everything because of it. I don't say that with satisfaction exactly. More with a kind of wry acknowledgement of how these things go when people let pettiness escalate past the point of sanity. The weeks leading up to our first proper winter storm that next year were, for the first time in several years, peaceful. The HOA newsletter came out on time, written in plain English without coded threats or oblique references to enforcement actions. The meeting agenda was posted in advance. When the storm came, 8 inches overnight with another 4 expected through the morning, the HOA had already arranged for the neighborhood's shared lanes and the clubhouse lot to be plowed, using a contractor selected through a competitive bidding process that had been run transparently with 3 bids compared and documented. I shoveled my driveway early in the morning, working in the cold gray light before the sun was fully up. Dave came out shortly after to do his own. We worked in parallel for a while, the scrape of metal shovels on concrete mixing, with the muffled quiet that heavy snow always brings to a neighborhood. At some point, Linda Chen came around the corner with her big orange snowblower and offered to run it through both our paths, which we accepted with gratitude because that machine is genuinely impressive, and Linda operates it with the confidence of someone who grew up in the snowbelt and has never once been afraid of winter. Harvey Bloom from down the street came by and mentioned that the new board had already fielded 3 concerns from homeowners that week and resolved 2 of them without any drama. The third one was about a fence height dispute between 2 neighbors that Harvey was quietly mediating. He seemed suited to it. He had that particular calm that some people carry that makes disagreements feel less permanent. We all stood in the street for a few minutes, 4 neighbors in heavy coats and hats, breathing steam and leaning on snow shovels, watching the plowing contractor work his way through the cul-de-sac. Nobody said anything profound. We didn't need to. The situation had said everything already. Eventually, we all went back inside. I made a second cup of coffee and sat by the front window, watching the snow fill in the footprints we'd left in the street, covering them slowly and evenly the way winter covers everything. I thought about the upcoming sunrise fuel delivery for the clubhouse, which was already scheduled and confirmed for mid-January. No holds, no administrative flags, full access, no questions, just a professional service provider doing their job for a community that had finally gotten its act together enough to let them do it. When that delivery came, I happened to be walking past the clubhouse with my hands in my pockets, heading nowhere in particular the way you do when winter settles in and the air is sharp and good for moving through. Dale was there, same cheerful energy, same green and white truck, same practiced efficiency. He waved when he saw me. I waved back. The hose went in, the pump ran, and 600 gallons flowed into the clubhouse tank without a single person standing in the parking lot with a clipboard and a persecution complex. "How's the neighborhood treating you?" Dale called over the sound of the pump. "Honestly," I said, "better than ever. He gave me a thumbs up and went back to monitoring the flow gauge. I stood there for a minute enjoying the simple normalcy of the moment. A delivery truck in a parking lot doing exactly what it was supposed to do. A warm building waiting to receive the heat it needed for the months ahead. A community that had gone through something genuinely difficult and come out on the other side of it more organized, more informed, and more connected than before. The whole episode had cost me time, stress, and more aggravation than I would have chosen. It had cost several of my neighbors real money in fraudulent fines, and it had cost the community 2 years of financial trust that Linda's team was still carefully rebuilding. None of that was trivial or cost-free. But something had been built in the process too, the kind of solidarity that only seems to emerge when people face something together that they didn't ask for and didn't deserve. I walked home through the winter air with my hands in my pockets. The sky was that particular shade of winter gray that isn't bleak so much as simply enormous, the kind of sky that makes the world feel wide and open. My street was clean and quiet, the driveways shoveled, the roads salted, the houses lit from inside with warm orange light, everything that a neighborhood is supposed to be. My front porch camera was still up, the one that had captured Marcia in my driveway on that first morning. I had kept the footage backed up on 2 drives and a cloud account. I still had it. I figured I would keep it for a while longer, not out of bitterness, but because it was part of the story, part of the evidence that had mattered when evidence was needed. Someday I would probably delete it when enough time had passed that it was just a historical footnote rather than a recent memory. That day wasn't quite here yet, but it was coming. Things were settling. The neighborhood was finding its new rhythm. The board was doing its job. The furnaces were running. The deliveries were coming through. That was enough. That was honestly everything. I went inside, hung up my coat, refilled my coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with nothing in front of me except a quiet afternoon and a warm house. And for the first time in what felt like a very long time, I didn't feel like I needed to be ready for anything. No orange notices. No clipboard-wielding neighbors in the snow. No fabricated violations. No phony fines. Just the radiator ticking away in the corner, doing its job on the back of 420 gallons of heating oil that had arrived exactly when it was supposed to, exactly where it was supposed to go, without a single person trying to stop it. I thought about Marcia one last time, the way you think about a difficult chapter of a book you finished weeks ago. Briefly, with something that wasn't quite sympathy and wasn't quite satisfaction, but was somewhere in between. She had wanted control over something, and she had reached for it in the worst possible way, and it had cost her more than she had ever imagined when she was standing in my driveway that cold morning thinking she was the most powerful person in a small suburban cul-de-sac. Power over people's daily lives is a strange and seductive thing when you hold a little of it. The mistake is thinking you can hold more than you've earned. The community had given Marcia a small administrative role, and she had stretched it until it broke, and then she had tried to stretch it further still, and eventually the whole structure of what she had built on top of that small, legitimate role came down around her. I didn't cause that. Neither did Dave or Ted or Linda or Dale. She caused it herself, the moment she decided that a neighbor's heating oil delivery was a threat to her authority rather than a perfectly normal thing happening on a cold winter morning in a neighborhood where people were just trying to stay warm. And that, I think, is really the whole story. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and steady, covering Pinecrest Hollow in the patient, indifferent white of another winter doing exactly what winters do. Inside, my house was warm, my tank was full, and everything was as it should be. I drank my coffee and let the afternoon go quiet around me.